Shall we? So hello everyone, on site and online. Welcome all to the core working group session at IETF116. I'm Marco Tiloca, my co-chairs are Jaime Jimenez and Karsten Bormann. We assume people present here especially have read the drafts in the agenda for today. Let's make a productive use of this time for face-to-face discussion, especially not well applies as usual, more on the next slides. Blue sheets are taken care of automatically. The chairs will pay attention to the chat. We have two note takers, Christian and Matthias. Thank you very much for that. Any help to them is also much appreciated. So this is an official IETF meeting. The note well applies. Be familiar with that if you're not already. It's not just about APR patents and so on. It's also and especially about our code of conduct. So please be nice with each other. Yeah, a few practicalities. As usual, this meeting is being recorded per the note well. For the on-site participant, be sure to sign on Miteco web version or on-site version. You can find the link for in the agenda and keep your audio and video off if you're using the web version unless you really need to, but please don't. If you want to join the queue, well, first do that in Miteco and then go to the mic. And please keep your mask on unless you are presenting or actively speaking at the mic in the queue. You can also ask to relay a question, just typing mic in the chat if you can talk or you have bad audio conditions. So the agenda for today is pretty packed. This is the list of presentations. We have in mind already a little agenda bashing. The idea was to starting with a slot about CoreConf, but we expect Rob Wilton to show up at some point, most likely in the second half of the meeting. So we'll skip the first slot on Young Seed and Komai, and we'll have it as soon as Rob shows up. But other than that, we'll cover the href document, conditional attributes, the use of EDOC for co-op and OSCORE, and other topic on OSCORE, especially about key update and limits. We have the public subscribe architecture for co-op also come back, and DNS over co-op, and so far all working group documents. And then we have 3 individual submission, the co-performance measurement presented also in the past in some interim meetings, COP over GATT, and a new submission, a young data model for EDOC and OSCORE. So presenters, please do your best to stay on time. We really need it today. Any further agenda bashing, anyone? Okay, then we continue with the document status overview. So the most advanced document we have in the queue is CoreSeed from the CoreConf cluster. It's still in ISG processing. There was a version 20 submitted recently, mostly to address a discussed ballot from Rob Wilton. And this also completed a third working group plus call, addressing most of the comments. Some little thing remained, and yeah, we are eager to hear from Rob what he thinks. And also there was a transfer of AD responsibility to Eric Binke from Francesca. And the document is also on today's agenda, of course. We also had another document, target ATR, that was adopted right after the previous meeting in London. The work on it was completed, passed working group plus call, and we requested publication for it as an informational RFC. It's now in AD evaluation for Rob Wilson to do. I'm shepherding this document. Post-working group plus call processing, we have another document from the CoreConf cluster, COMIP. There's been a little change in authorship and shepherding there. So Karsten is a co-author now, and the new shepherd is Michael Richardson. This is also proceeding. It's in today's agenda. We plan to have one new last call on it in the following months. More from CoreConf is Young Library that is a bit on hold at the moment, and it has to follow what happens with COMI. And we also have Oscar Group Com currently in Shepherd write-up. Okay, more post-working group plus call processing. There's another document related to group communication, group combis, also waiting for a follow-up from the completing working group plus call, and the Shepherd is expected to be Karsten. And the next two documents are in the agenda from today. One is conditional attributes that also had a working group plus call, and there are issues to be addressed and a revision to be expected. And CoreScore ad hoc that also completed the working group plus call with comments addressed, and the Shepherd will be Karsten. Thinking of other documents, working group documents not in the agenda for today, there has been a resubmission of transport indication and also of phaser after a couple of years without resubmission, and the authors address especially comments from two previous reviews, one of which an early review from the transport area. They expect at least one more revision, possibly approaching working group plus call, and we plan to have this document discussed in one of the next interim meetings. Then there's a document pending working group adoption for a while, and the latest resubmissions have been just rebumps to keep the document as is before then. And more other documents, there have been individual submissions resubmitted before the cutoff. Two of those are in the agenda, as we mentioned, Co-op Overgat and Co-op PM. We had 4 more, no time to check them today, but you are encouraged to read those documents and provide comments on the list. We also had 3 brand new documents submitted since 1:15. One is in the agenda for today, and 2 more documents from Christian are, well, one intended as a placeholder to facilitate a code point registration for problem detailing. We may want to consider at some point if it's worth doing something more than just having a placeholder. And one submitted yesterday related to the ad hoc key establishment protocol that I think is also in the interest of the late working group to check. That was all about the document status, and we plan to resume the interim meetings according to the same cadence every other Wednesday in the European afternoon, starting from April 26, alternating with CBOR, and there seemed to be already agreement between the core and CBOR chairs to have this plan. So if there's no strong objection today, we plan to check with the mailing list for 1 week or so, and then confirm and book the interim meetings. So that concludes the chair's introduction. And again, we skipped this slot for now, waiting for Rob to join us. And we start with href as actual first presentation. That's Karsten. Yep.
So this will probably be a short one. Yeah, thank you. Just to remind people about what this is about, you all have heard about URIs, and these are text-based things with complex syntax, not the right thing to use in constrained devices. CoAP has a nice URI format that is used in requests and responses. But of course, we have to carry around URI style information in many other places. So we decided to extract the data model of URIs and create something called CRIs, which are CBOR-based concise resource identifiers. So one of the last issues we had was we usually want to have very short names for the URI schemes. So something like CoAP is 4 characters, 4 bytes, and this is highly redundant. So we go to negative integers for that. Negative because positives are used for something else in CRIs. And we started out by a list of 10 schemes that we wanted to support. And then we noticed, what happens if we want to do one of the other ones? And after a lot of back and forth, we decided, well, why don't we just register URI scheme numbers for URI schemes that exist, which are like 360 or so. So it's not a particularly expensive thing to do. And dash 12 of this document has an appendix which does just that. It has scheme numbers for the existing registered URI schemes. So that is essentially done from a technical point of view. It's not quite clear how to do this from a procedural view. So let me talk about one other item first, which is extensibility. Now URIs are complex and people do weird things with them. We want to keep things simple for the simple usages, and the current base CRI definition handles all applications that CoreApp is good for. But if people really want to move to CRIs, they might want to handle other usages of URIs. And that's in particular the case when you have extensive use of percent encoding to use delimiters that have a meaning in the URI syntax in a place where they are not supposed to have the meaning. And this needs to be somehow encoded in CRI, which doesn't itself has a percent encoding equivalent. So section 7 used to be how to do percent encoding, but it now is a more general section that clarifies this extension approach. And section 7.1 now contains the PET percent encoded text extensions. And we have an issue that provides text, or a PR that provides text, how to clarify, how to handle CRIs with unknown extensions. As soon as you get extensibility, of course, you have nodes with different extensions implemented. And of course, you cannot handle ones that have extensions that you don't know about. But that is, of course, not much different from having a URI scheme you don't understand, or something else, DNS name you cannot resolve. So there are many ways in which CRIs can fail, and this just adds another one. So I think we have a pretty reasonable way forward here, but of course some more comments on this PR number 62 would be useful, and about the general way extensions are handled here. Next slide. Weird. Okay, and then, as always, we have those little things that don't really matter in the grand scheme of things, but you have to get them right. And one question was, how do we represent an empty path in absolute CRIs? We have the choice between an empty array, and so we have 0 path name components, so we have an empty array, or CBOR null. Both take 1 byte, so it's kind of a coin toss. But a trailing null in a CRI can be elided. So if you just want to say http://facebook.com, then you save a byte by not including that empty path. On the other hand, you need the empty array to override a path in the CRI reference. So yeah, you need both, and someone has to come in and make a decision here. And a related issue is what do you do with a completely empty CI that has no component of a URI, and turns out that the result is not really useful, so we might as well just disallow it and don't have any further issue with that. And the third thing is when we say that certain things have to be in UTF-8, or that things that are not in UTF-8 are encoded using this percent encoded text construct, we kind of burden the implementations with doing some checking that they shouldn't need to do. So if you get a CRI from somewhere and send it on, it's a bit of a unneeded complication to have to check it. So the current point of view that is in issue 44 is that those who rely on the correctness, on the strictness, have to do the checking, but other implementations do not have to do checking. But of course, if they actually generate the stuff, they probably should be doing this right. Okay, so let's see whether, no, I can. Yeah, so the next step is to decide these remaining questions, and it would really help if we could get some mailing list discussion going on this. Again, this is mostly boring stuff, but it's the stuff that if we get it wrong will hurt us in the end. And maybe we can complete the discussion about a month from now in an interim. That is according to the plan that Marco provided, the first interim that we will have. Any questions? Okay, Matthias has one but doesn't want to say it. Okay, a quick question. Who has read a recent version of this document? One. So that would be my request, to actually have a look at this and see whether it fits what you are trying to do with it. Okay, thank you. So we move on.
Thank you, Carsten. Yeah, next would be Bill with conditional attributes.
Thanks. Can we lower this a bit? Okay. It looks like I don't have very much time than 10 minutes, so I'll try to be fast with the presentation.
That's all.
Sorry?
That's an old countdown.
Okay.
You do have 10 minutes.
10 minutes is good. Yeah. I had 10 seconds before. Okay. So hi, I'm here to present conditional attributes for core. There are basically two major points that I have. Where was the point here? Yeah. Okay, this is good. All right, thank you. Okay, this draft has been going through a few different iterations, split away from other documents, and finally has gone through working group last call, and then also an early review from the IoT Directorate. So it's still at version 0.06. This week I will be releasing version 7. So if you are available for a discussion and you want to provide more comments, I'm available this week, so we could discuss those things. So anyway, this is going to be a combination of different things that had happened since we called for the working group last call, and also the IoT Directorate. And part of it was also discussed at the last interim meeting, or one of the last interim meetings. But let's say we just jump into the issues. There are two major issues that I want to discuss. The first one came up from a comment from the IoT Directorate review, which says that the draft states that the intended status is informational, and should the intended status be standards track. So I'd like to hear your opinions. should we keep this as informational or should it be standards track? Anybody who objects to this being standards track, please raise your hand.
Yeah. So what's the difference between standards track and informational? From the IETF point of view, standards track kind of implies this is the way we expect to do some things. And we usually do informational documents if we describe a way of doing things. Of course, that's not a hard boundary. Within the procedures, there is a big difference between a standards track and an informational document with respect to the effort the ISG has to put into to make it happen.
Mm.
So informational documents are usually faster than standards track documents. Now, on the consumer side, there may be SDOs that really only want to concern themselves with standards track documents.
Yes.
So if we know that about one of the consumers of this document, then they take the decision for us.
Right. Matthias.
Yeah, this is Matthias Kovac. So what I see is that content of this or like this had been picked up by other SDOs already. So for instance, there's a usage in it in lightweight M2M. I've seen Connex IoT doing something similar. The issue I have with deciding this is there are some implementations out there. This is now a way kind of summarizing or a continuation of the original intent, but we're somewhat missing how to converge all the different versions we have out there. And I've seen even some things that do not fully work, let's say in this Connex IoT part. So I would like to see this as standards track, but I think that this would need work to work with other SDOs to kind of realign and maybe even fix some things that do not fully work.
Do we have any liaisons with OMA or with, what was it, IoT Connex, did you say?
Yeah, KNX IoT is a user of something similar with some similar concepts like a lifetime. We discussed this, that there's even a clash with the RD. To my understanding, Jaime is active in the other one, so we would have some kind of direct participation.
Okay, right, yeah. So we probably need to have a quick discussion with them and then come back to see whether, if they're willing to accept this as an informational document, I'll be okay to keep the current status.
What we can do also in one of the OMA sessions, one of the DMSE meetings where lightweight M2M is standardized, you can also present this, and we can also raise it there and mention it there. I mean, we can also do it offline asynchronously, but if you want, you can have the stage there as well.
Okay, yeah, okay. Let's go with that. So I'm agnostic. We can either keep it informational or standards track. I just want a consensus, and then we move forward. It's the easiest thing to do for me. And you're right, Karsten. I was reading through rather carefully and whether it should be informational or standards, and apparently there's a lot of wiggle space for movement between the two. So I could not come to a decision on my own. Okay. Thank you. Matthias, yes.
A clarifying question, like how urgent do you feel about finishing this work? So it feels like this has been around since Zach started the idea. So I don't know if we really have time pressure now. So I feel a bit consolidating might be actually the better move here than rushing it just to be done with the document now.
I think we're on the final stretch already.
Yeah.
So of course it's a bit nasty to wait for 2 months, 3 months, but if we can at least get a quick decision within a few weeks, that will be fine. That will be fine. Yeah. Okay. All right. I've got 3.5 minutes, so I'm gonna just go to the next part. So this is the other big part that I wanted to present to you today. So which was basically a review from Klaus talking about how this mechanism in this draft is actually clashing with the way Core Observe works. We discussed this at one interim meeting, but I'll just come back to this and see what the solution that we're proposing is. So the main issue is that conditional attributes, the way it's written right now, alters the way observes are sent, which means that certain clients that receive representations of the actual resource will no longer get the notifications as the observe was intended to do. The proposal was that instead of interfering under what conditions and the way the server generates notifications, the draft should define how server updates resource states and how the client can influence this. And to paraphrase, a good way apparently is resource state projection. So using resource state projection, then the new states can be observed by the client. So just a background about what resource state projection is. It's a technique that can be used by clients who request servers to deliver partial or a summary representation of states. It's quite commonly used with REST APIs as a means to reduce payload response. So the implication of using state projection with conditional attributes is this. Basically, when a server receives a request containing conditional attributes, this is basically a query parameter. The server provides a projected resource state to the client, which is separate from the original resource state requested without conditional attributes. So essentially, you're talking about a virtual resource. And if I want to represent this in terms of a message sequence diagram, so let's assume that client A is communicating with a server that is providing a resource called CO2, which delivers the actual values of carbon dioxide emissions, and sets an observe relationship. So client A sets up an observe relationship, and then whenever the resource state changes, then the server delivers the actual state representation. But client B wants to use conditional attributes, so it's asking for the same resource, but appending the resource with a query parameter called greater than 1000 ppm. So obviously the server will acknowledge that, register the interest, and then it proceeds to eventually provide the resource state projection. So which basically means that for client A will continue to get, in that sense, the resource CO2 whenever it changes, and client B is essentially being given the resource state projection. So this is the idea that we are going forward with, and I think that this appears to also satisfy the request for a slight rewrite about this. So if that's okay with you, then we'll go forward with that. Now, the next question then came with one of the reviews. I'm sorry that I'm just 20 seconds, but it's about cancellation. How do you cancel the registration? And so when you look at the RFC 7641 for observe, there are basically two ways to do that. Firstly, the client can just essentially forget the registration, and whenever the server gets a new response, then you get a reset message. So that's kind of like the way that you can do that. The other way is that the client sends an observe option with the value 1. But now, if we are talking about resource state projections, then I would propose that the way we do registration cancellation, and that the draft could recommend, is that you do the cancellation, but you should have the conditional attributes in the URI. Would that be sensible? Any comments?
Christian answers, yes, very sensible.
I think Christian said something. Yes, thank you.
Very sensible.
I see that. Thank you, Christian. Okay, that's it. And the rest of it is things that are on the to-do list. I mentioned the security consideration text should be expanded to include some things that were also reviewed by, I think it was John Matson, and that would go in. And then there were some small things, INR considerations and some certain needs that we will do that. And that's all I have. Thank you.
Thanks, Bill. Any more question, comments? Anyone for Bill? yes to the proposal on page 9.
Okay.
Thanks, Christian. Thank you again. We are perfectly on time. So the next would be Rickard with ad hoc for co-op and OSCORE. And please go ahead sharing the slides yourself if it works for you.
Yes, sounds good. Okay, so you should be able to see my slides now. And yes, so today I will be presenting this draft using ad hoc with co-op and OSCORE, which has now reached version 7. And what has happened since IETF115? Well, it's completed a working group last call, and we also received reviews from both Christian Amsys and John P. Mattsson, so thanks a lot for that. During the core interim on the 1st of March, a number of selected comments were discussed, and we got a lot of good feedback on those. And yeah, version 7 has then been submitted before the cutoff date, with all these comments from the reviews being addressed. And to summarize what has been changed and updated, first of all, there was a proposal to change the document title. So we have now changed it to this more straightforward using ad hoc with co-op and OSCORE. And one of the main changes we have done is to actually change the payload format in the ad hoc plus OSCORE request. So this used to be a CBER sequence. However, we have now changed it such that the ad hoc message 3 part is a CBER data item, in this case a byte string, followed by the OSCORE ciphertext not wrapped in a CBER byte string, where it was previously wrapped in a CBER byte string. And I mean, one main benefit of this change is, of course, reducing the overhead on the wire. We also did some other updates on the message processing to clarify when a context is actually created. So now we state clearly that the client first creates ad hoc message 3, and after that, it drives the OSCORE security context. And we also clear now that after ad hoc message 3, ad hoc mirror messages are not protected with OSCORE, because that was one comment asking us to be more clear on that point. And yeah, we're now stating that explicitly they are not protected with OSCORE. And we also did some updates on the error handling on the server regarding the ad hoc option, which is now more future-proof and more general in the way it is described in the text. There was also a lot of comments on web linking. What we did first of all is prefix all the target attributes we define in the document. So we prefix them now by ed- to give context on what these are about. And we have also registered these attributes in the target attributes IANA registry. Based on some of the review comments, we also thought a bit more on what may be missing in the current target attributes, and we added 2 more, which is the EDI and EDR, and INR there stands for initiator and responder. So these basically indicate the ad hoc roles and in the ad hoc terminology, the flows supported by the server. That is the forward or reverse message flow. There was one example we had of the actual message exchange when you do an example showing the target attributes basically, and we have now reverted that example back to using well-known ad hoc as a resource. Previously we were using our own defined resources there, but it's just clear to actually use well-known ad hoc as the example. We also defined in the document now a ad hoc authentication credential types IANA registry, and the intent here is that the target attribute edcred-t will take its values from this registry. And one simplification we did was that in the previous version, we had 4 different target attributes related to the EAD. So EAD 1, 2, 3, 4. However, from the review comments and our own internal discussion, we decided to simplify that such that we only have a single target attribute, EAD, which indicates that the server supports a specific EAD item. So it's basically simplifying the semantics of this, while before it said what EAD do you support for each individual ad hoc message 1, 2, 3, 4. Now it only says overall what EAD items the server supports. Some things that we did not do in this document, which is more left to the actual ad hoc draft or possible follow-up works, is first of all, there was an idea about defining a new IANA registry for ad hoc application profiles, which could then be a source of values for a possible target attribute, ED prof, to indicate which profiles a certain resource supports. And associated with that is an idea about defining a well-known ad hoc application profile. But again, these will be left for further works or the actual ad hoc main draft. Going to the next slide, we expanded a bit on the security considerations and made it clear that the optimized workflow where you actually use this combined request will yield a minimum of 128-bit security against online attacks. We did some removal of content in the sense that there was a separate appendix on performance considerations when using Blockwise, but this has been removed, and instead we have a short sentence giving a kind of summary or conclusion about this that we placed in section 321. There were also a number of clarifications that was done. First of all, using this terminology forward message flow and reverse message flow that ad hoc draft also uses. And we improved a bit on the terminology related to co-op and CBOR. There was a simplification about how do you choose the ad hoc and OSCORE identifiers. And we also did some updates to the examples to clarify them and overall make them better. And yeah, various editorial improvements in addition to that. And yeah, summary and next steps. So version 7 addressed all the working group last call comments, and we do not have any other further issues known. So from our point of view, this document is now ready for Shepherd review and write-up. And yeah, thank you for listening. And of course, any comments and questions are very welcome here or of course on the mailing list.
Thank you, Richard. Any comment or question, anyone? I think Göran.
Göran Selander. So just one comment on the ad hoc issues. Have you brought them to the issue tracker on ad hoc so you remember them?
No, that is something we should definitely take a note. I don't believe we have done that, so that's a good point. Yeah.
Please do that. Thank you.
Yes, we can do that. Thanks for that. That's a good suggestion. Thank you. Yeah.
Heard none. I guess the next step is on the chairs on this document. Okay. Thanks. And next is Richard again, now on key limits and key update or kudos.
Yes. So I guess, yes, I can actually change the deck dynamically here right away. So let me find that slide in the list here.
You can start with limits, actually. I think it's only 2 slides.
Indeed. Yeah, I was just going to do that. So the limit, this is a quite short presentation. So basically, this is about a new draft, which is these key usage limits for OS Core, and it's now version 0, so a brand new one. And well, just a brief overview on how did this come to be. Well, this is a new draft submitted as a working group document. And what we did is we took the content that used to be in the key update for OSCORE kudos draft, and we moved that and split it out to its own separate freestanding draft. And this has been discussed during a previous core interim last year, and it was also discussed and confirmed during IETF115. So essentially, what we did now is we took that existing content and we haven't done any significant updates on that. It's more about making this new draft. And okay, so what is this content about? Well, it is about AAD key usage limits and how they are relevant for OS Core. And as a brief overview, basically, if you do excessive use of the same key in the sense of encryptions or failed decryptions, that can enable breaking certain security properties of the AAD algorithm. And this stems from a draft, ongoing draft in CFRG, this draft CFRG AAD limits. So what we wanted to do in this separate draft about OSCORE is to define appropriate limits for OSCORE for a variety of algorithms, because these limits basically they depend on the algorithm and the algorithm's properties. So in the draft we have numbers for a selection of algorithms to show what appropriate limits can be. And we also in this draft define counters for the key usage, meaning how should OSCORE keep track of the key usage. And we define message processing details and also what steps to take when you actually reach these limits. And yeah, I think that's about it. I mean, yeah, to summarize, yeah, this is a new draft split out from the key update for OSCORE 1. And our intended next steps is to address pending open points. And we also want to follow the updates happening to the draft in CFRG and align things accordingly. And here again, comments and views to this document are very welcome. So with that, I think I can switch to the actual kudos presentation. And feel free to jump in with anything while I switch. Okay, so I switch to this one. So this is a presentation about the draft key update for OSCORE, from which that previous material I discussed was extracted. So just as a recap, what is now currently present in this draft? Well, first of all, it's about the key update for OSCORE kudos procedure. And the point of this procedure is to renew the OSCORE master secret and master salt, which will then lead to derivation of new sender and recipient keys. And some selected properties of this procedure is that you do not actually change the ID context value, and it can also achieve perfect forward secrecy. And its design is loosely inspired by the Appendix B2 procedure that is defined in the OSCORE RFC. And now for the point 2, well, this is what it used to contain, also material about the limit, which has now been split out into its own document. And thirdly, it does also contain a procedure for how two peers can update their OSCORE sender and recipient IDs, basically exchanging their new desired recipient ID using a new co-op option. And this is just an overview of how the actual procedure works, the kudos procedure. I mean, in a nutshell, it's about an exchange of nonces between the two pairs. And based on those nonces, you can derive new keying material for the pairs to use in their continued communication with OSCORE. And to enable this, we extended the OSCORE option to add a bit signaling this is about kudos. And we also added a nonce place to put the nonce and an X byte. And the X byte basically encodes the nonce length and also flags that can indicate if you want to preserve observations or not, and if you wish to run in the stateless or stateful mode. So there's 2 modes to support also very constrained devices. And yeah, then I can go into some more detailed things regarding updates done from IETF115. So first of all, we clarified that the security context CTX-old should not be used for sending any outgoing messages, meaning that after a peer has transitioned to CTX-new, that is the context that should be used for future sending of messages. We also did some changes in the terminology to align things with other drafts. So we switched from the client-initiated version to the forward message flow, and we switched from the server-initiated version to the reverse message flow. And based on discussions during previous meetings, we have now stressed that the usage of the ad hoc EAD item kudos EAD that we define is purely optional. So during an ad hoc execution, you can use this EAD item to learn what modes of kudos and if kudos at all is supported by the other pair. However, even if you choose to not use this EAD item at all, peers can always rely on signaling using this no forward secrecy bit that we have defined as part of the X byte in the OSCORE option. And further updates also triggered by comments is that we want to make it clear that kudos can be used for active rekeying. So a peer can decide that it wants to run the kudos procedure at any point in time and for any reason. So there's no need for some specific event or that the peer needs some form of trigger to do this. It can really do it at any point in time. It doesn't have to be because you reach the limits or because the content expired. It can be just because that peer wishes to perform a key update. We also clarified a little bit on when you have message exchanges overlapping with the kudos execution. So for instance, you can have a case where a client sends an outgoing request and immediately after that initiates the kudos procedure. So basically it means that the sent request from the client will be protected with the CTX-old, but the incoming response then from the server will be protected with CTX-new because that response is produced after kudos has finished and after CTX-new has been derived on the server side. So this means in practice that the client must be ready to accept co-op responses protected with a different OSCORE context than what was used to protect the corresponding request. And in the case of the reverse message flow, this can also occur if the client is using n-start greater than 0, meaning that it sends basically multiple requests without waiting for their corresponding response. And in such case, if one of these outgoing requests becomes a kudos trigger message, then the other requests from the client will be served by the server after kudos has completed, and also thus in this case the responses will be protected with CTX-new. So again, it's about having that flexibility of being ready to accept messages that are protected with a different context than the request was. Further updates, we have now added a intended registration of a well-known kudos resource. And the intent is that a peer can use this resource as target for any kudos message that is a request. So for instance, in the forward message flow, the first request from the client would target this resource. And as an addition to that, we registered a resource type, core.kudos, which can be used then for discovery of these kudos resources. And the next point, this was also triggered by comments we got. So we added in, there is one part of the draft, it lists a number of existing methods for performing rekeying of OSCORE. So we added to that list the ad hoc key update method also, in addition to the existing ones that are in it, which are, for instance, we also list like the OSCORE ACE profile and the current Appendix B2 and other existing methods. Next one is also triggered by some feedback. This is about defining what is considered hard limits for rekeying, meaning when you actually must rekey. And we now clarify that expiration of an core security context and the exceeding of the key usage limits, those things serve as hard limits, and at that point a peer must run kudos. But you can of course run it for other reasons than that. Yeah, we had a section now about preventing deadlocks. So there are a number of scenarios. We list 3 separate scenarios where deadlocks could occur and how the peers must act to prevent this from happening. So for instance, these are based on kudos execution happening and kudos failing to complete on one of the pairs, but the pair where kudos succeeded immediately initiates a new execution of kudos. In those cases, you could have gotten some scenarios that could have led to a deadlock, which we now expand on in quite some detail in that section. Furthermore, we have a section now with some examples of expected message overhead for kudos. Of course, this is highly dependent on the nonce size. So we show 3 examples where you have a very small nonce of 1 byte, a typical one of 8 bytes, and then a larger one of 16 bytes. And you can see the relevant overhead per message and also overall for the entire kudos execution. And this was also based on some feedback received. Next one is, this was also raised in the IETF115 meeting in London. So we discovered a case here in the client-initiated version or the forward message flow, where in the response 1, it is important that the server actually includes a partial AV in that response. And typically servers in OS Core, they wouldn't include a partial AV unless it's about notifications. However, in this case, you need to do it to ensure that you prevent reuse of the same AD nonce and key. So as you can see in this table, basically the key aspect here is that the request number 2 from the server will end up using the same nonce and the same sender key fundamentally as response 1 from the server. So due to that, you need to ensure that you actually have a partial AV included in, as we indicate in this in the figure on the right. And what we did now, and this was also what we raised in London, basically previously we only had a fix targeting this specifically to kudos. However, we have now added a general text to fix this and make this a requirement also for the OS Core RFC. So this will become another point where this document updates the OS Core RFC, and the other things that it updates the OS Core RFC for are deprecating the Appendix B2 procedure and the updates to the OS Core option. So we added now text to say that basically if the server is using a different security context for the response compared to what was used to verify the request, in such case the server must include a partial AV in the response to prevent this problem in general and not just for kudos specifically. And I will speed up a bit now for the end. So these are the updates related to the ID update procedure. So we clarified how you can enable preservation of observations when updating the sender and recipient ID based on storing the KID parameter used in observe requests and then using that same KID in the external ID for message verification or protection. And we also added some motivation on why a peer may wish to use this procedure for updating those core sender and recipient ID, because it can help mitigate correlation of peers communication. And so, for instance, 2 peers may want to use this procedure right before they switch to a different network for their communication to change their IDs for that continued communication. Next steps, we want to produce an implementation of this. We also wish to expand a bit the section about OSCORE ID updates, especially elaborating on the examples. We want to address all the open pending points. So these are, by the way, all listed as issues in the repository for this draft. And again, any comments, feedback, and reviews are very welcome. So thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Richard. Any question or comment? Hearing none, thanks again. And the next in line is Jaime for PubSub.
So hello everyone. Let me just test. Does it work? Yes. So I'll be presenting the PubSub draft. Many of you are probably familiar with it because it's not one of the newer drafts in core. It's a bit of the senior ones. So working group adoption was in 2016, and since then we have had multiple iterations. And this version is trying to consolidate the work and to try to push it forward to the last line, right? The current design is inspired mostly in two drafts: the Coral PubSub, which is the one introducing the topic configuration that this draft expands on. And then the OSCORE group on admin, which is basically bringing a lot of the topic collection resource structures that we use as well. Let's continue. So as a quick recap, publish, subscribing co-op essentially consists on using co-op clients as publishers and subscribers that use co-op methods on URIs to let's say that use this type of broker-based architecture where you have constant notifications and constant traffic being received by the subscribers. So then, and that's the high-level view. This broker in particular, I mean, this image, maybe I will have to update it because the subscription doesn't really happen always on the broker. It's not broker dependent. You can subscribe to a resource that is hosted elsewhere, but for the sake of the presenting, this is enough. Now, the new things is in this API overview, the new things are the resource structure. So there is one topic collection that contains a set of topic configurations, or let's call them topics for now. And inside them, you have a series of parameters that are used for configuration of the topics. And among these parameters, there is a topic data resource. And that topic data is a URI to the actual topic that you subscribe to or you publish to. You can see there the operations that you can do on the collection. So you can create and delete and so on. On the topic configuration, similarly, you use the co-op methods to create and configure topics, update them, and so on. And the topic properties, which is the item that maybe at the end that we will discuss a bit further, is the one that actually is well defined, but maybe we could have more features there. But anyway, that's done by a topic administrator, not necessarily by a publisher or a subscriber. Next, so this topic data resource has basically this publish subscribe communication pattern, and is what the previous draft basically was about. So for those who have implemented the previous draft, it will be very trivial to adapt it to this new one, but they would maybe have to implement the topic configuration part. And operations, as you know, like the subscription is co-op get with observe option to enable it or to unsubscribe. And the publication is the put. Yeah, I mean, it's self-explanatory there. Another new thing or a clarification here is the topic lifecycle. Because a topic now is in a sense two resources, not just one. The state of both resources matter in order to know whether a topic is actually created or not. So, for example, a topic configuration. The moment you create the topic configuration in the red area there, you do a post operation with a set of parameters to configure this topic. Like you say, these are the resource types, the media type, this is the type of application. You may say also this is the topic data URI that you can use to subscribe, but you don't have to. The broker may create it for you, as in this case. and the broker will return the location of this topic configuration. So it's the first one there that starts with 7B, 7.2, blah, blah, blah. Within it, you will have the topic data resource that the future publishers and subscribers will use to operate. But that resource at the moment doesn't have any, doesn't contain any state, any resource state, because nobody has published on it. So then we go to the fully created state, which is when a publisher actually published something there. Like for instance, there you have a CNML measurement of the current temperature. And at that point, it is fully created and subscribers can subscribe to it. In the half created state, you get a 404. In the fully created, you get the actual values. And yeah, and you move back and forth. For example, if you delete the topic data, you go back to half created. If you delete the full topic configuration, then basically you delete the topic itself. And yep. This is a workflow example. Maybe to have more time for the discussion, let's skip it, but it's also pretty straightforward. Yeah, we had well, I implemented this basically during the hackathon, 200 lines of Python. So the benefits that we have today compared with 2016 is that the implementations of co-op are very solid. Like for example, IO co-op. So it's not difficult to get started. You just need to implement the collection resource, topic resource, and topic data resource, and the interfaces to them. And this is now open source. I mean, MIT license, if you wish. And anybody can fetch it. And I recommend actually to start with the code before reading the draft, because probably it's easier to grasp the topic configuration feature. Now for discussion. I apologize that I have put it all in one slide. Maybe I should have multiple ones per topic. But so from this draft, it would be nice to get more feedback on which kind of properties for the topic configuration are missing. So for example, we have maximum subscribers. I already got some feedback that maybe having maximum publishers also will be interesting. Which kind of fields will be relevant to have in here? That's one thing. Another is the topic name. So among the fields that we had, one is topic name, but it doesn't really have much meaning. It's just, in a way, it's a string that the application decides that has meaning only to the application. But we could potentially have a UUID or URN or some sort of space or namespace or range for it. I don't know if it is the best option. I mean, I don't know. We also maybe, I don't know, we could also delete it even if we have some other better identifier, because for instance, topic data could be used as identifier as well. I don't know. So that's another food for thought. Yeah, then, yeah, this is when it's a bit interesting. So max subscribers, because the subscription, maybe I can go back, because the subscription pattern, just a second, is with the get operation, get with observe. Sorry, I don't have this slide. But anyway, as we get with observe, when you, when the broker is denying the subscription, at the moment, the RFC for observe, what it says is that you should return a 205 with the current measurement, and I think is observed or set to 1, and essentially canceling the subscription. However, this could also be interpreted as an error, I suppose. So you could get more verbose information, like some sort of problem detail structure telling you you're actually not allowed to subscribe, or just like with authorization, you could get like you don't have the right credentials to subscribe to this topic and so on. So it might be that we want to look into error types here. Then, yeah, a lot of the authorization and administrative operations are out of scope, blah, blah, blah. Actually, we have 2 minutes, so because the agenda is pretty packed, you can read a lot of it already, and you probably have. Let's skip to maybe questions and comments, and then I go through the rest to give time for discussion. If any comments pop up. Yep, Christian, go ahead.
Yeah, Christian, I'm just having a maximum limit of subscribers at all feels a bit weird to me on the application level, because this observation is a pure protocol mechanism. So from whether these are distinct observers, that this may be a matter of authorization in terms of, are you allowed to communicate, to use communication resources with that server at all? But don't see quite how this would map cleanly all the way up to the topic that that party is subscribed to. Especially given that observation is supposed to be equivalent to constant polling, in which case you can't distinguish the observers unless they are authorized, and then you can use the authorization credentials.
Got it. So if I interpreted correctly, you're saying that this type of state or situation is better reflected with some sort of authorization type of error, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I think many of them will be that type of error, which is not yet defined.
Okay, thank you, Jaime. We have about 5 seconds left, which
if there are no comments, thank you very much.
Use to comment you on resurrecting this draft and following our recent theme of radical simplification. I think this is so much better now the way it looks. So thank you for doing that.
Thank you very much. Much appreciated.
So we postponed one item from the start of the agenda, waiting for Rob Wilton, who is now here. So I think we are moving to the CoreConf item next. Okay, so this is just a very quick overview slide of where we are. We have published RFC 9254, which tells us how to represent Yang in SIBO. This representation is very efficient because it uses something called SIDs, and the allocation of those SIDs is the subject of the core SID draft, which we are discussing today. Then the next component is to make sure that we have a way to actually do Yang transactions over COAP, which is the COMAI document. And finally, we have a special Yang library that can be used by constraint systems that don't want to support the whole Yang library construct. Now, this work has been pushed forward a lot by an intering just a couple of weeks ago, where we looked at the broader CoreConf Yang landscape, in particular interactions with the LP-WAN group, which I think turned out to be very interesting. So if you want to get a broader overview, we spent 2 hours at that time, and I'm just going to spend 8 more minutes about this. So let's talk about the SID allocation mechanism. So this is something that people have told us you cannot do. So it was particularly interesting to do it anyway. And took us a while. This is revision 20, and the original work on this started in 2013 or 14, I don't remember. We had a lot of discussions with Ayana and so on. And of course, the main problem is this is not a technical issue. This is a people issue. So you want to make sure that the people who are working on documents that need these allocations know what to do and what not to do. So this document is in, or has been in ISG processing for a while, and has received so many changes that we did a parallel working group last call, which completed a couple of weeks ago. And we still have to work in the remaining results of this parallel working group last call. And there we also did one stupid mistake in -20, which didn't allow Rob to clear his discuss, so that will also be fixed in the next version. Yeah, the main problem we're having right now is that the Yang tool landscape seems to be a bit empty, so we essentially have to do our own updates to the PYang tool to address the working group last call comments. And the main comment is In the example that we have in the document, do we actually have all SIDs that may be needed in there? And the answer is probably no. And that, of course, raises the question, how far do we go in doing a complete set? So Yang works with the schema nodes. And not all of these schema nodes are usually used for interchanging data. So that there are nodes in the schema like choices that really are there only to hang other items on, which then actually communicated. And Yang so far has not generated SIDs for these, but it turns out that there are some things you may want to do outside the normal data exchange where you would need. So yeah, the current sentiment is that we are going to change the example to have a very, very full set of data nodes. It's not a disaster if we miss one, excuse me, schema nodes. It's not a disaster if we miss any because SIDs can always be added. So the example will not be worthless. It will just not be good guidance for other people to do their SID allocations. So that's one issue where we are still working on making sure that we have our things in order. And just to give you an excerpt of that, in Yang, of course, you can describe remote procedure calls and actions, which are essentially remote method invocations. And this is the top half of the slide is the SIDs that are currently being generated. And we have been reminded that the input and the output side of an RPC are actually different things. So you need different SIDs for that. And we will have to allocate a few more. So I think in the next couple of weeks, we will make the necessary changes in the Yang tool and discuss this with a few more people from the Yang ecosystem. So we will be able to fix this or make a more complete example. Of course, if you do a SID file, the official SID file for a Yang module, and you miss a SID that you actually would want to use for communication, then your communication is not going to work. So for the actual SID files that we generate, it's important to get these right. Now, the other question is, what is this document actually doing? I mean, it's supplying an example for SID allocation, it generates registries and so on, but it also describes the process. And it looks like we will have a regular process, which is what this document describes. And we will also have some more application-specific processes. So for instance, the LPWAN people need to be so frugal with their bits and bytes that they actually want more control over the SID allocation based on their specific data model. So they cannot use a tool like Yang to do this. They have to do this manually. And I think we will see this occasionally. This will not be the normal thing because we are really talking about single bytes here. But there are applications that need that. And then, of course, the question is, how does a designated expert who runs a registry check a document? We currently don't have good tools to do that. So currently people are sending Excel sheets with SIDs around, and maybe we need to go beyond that. So we have the correctness issue, and again, of course, we also have the completeness issue. Some more tool generation may be necessary in this space. Rob.
Rob Wilton, Cisco. So just a quick question. I don't understand the exact process, but if they were to manually allocate those SIDs and then write them to a SID file, if you then to put them to Pyang and say, generate the list of new SIDs for this, would that effectively sort of give you that completeness check or verify you're doing the right thing? Maybe with some option.
Yes. Good point. Thank you. Okay. There also was some IENA input on -20, including what exactly is the status of the private use space. Is it private use or experimental use? IENA makes a difference here. IENA was also concerned about the synchronization points. IENA has an elaborate dance they do with the RFC Production Center to make sure things get published at the right time. And it's not quite clear how the publication of the SID file fits into this dance. And that's probably something we need to discuss in person during this week. The INI people are here. And the third question was, how do we handle multiple versions of SID files? So if somebody registers a SID file for a Yang module that already exists, and then there is a new version of the SID file for the same existing version of the Yang module, how is this handled? And my hunch would be that you really want to override the old one, because why do you do a new one if you make sure in handling these things that this doesn't cause a problem. Okay, now I have 15 seconds left. Maybe I will need a. Thank you. Yeah. So the other thing is the Komai document that is essentially the equivalent to the RESTconf document. So RFC 8040 defines how to do Yang over HTTP, and Komai says how to do Yang over CoAP. And this was started by Peter Wenderstock, like in 2015 again. So Peter is the mastermind behind all this. And recently we had some implementer feedback that motivated us to look for ways to simplify this. And we made a few great simplifications in -12 and came up with the idea at the interim that we could simplify some more. And there is now a simplify branch in the repo that previews -13 that we want to do. And what we decided to do in the end is to get rid of any URI encoding of instance identifiers. So we had text that described how to do this and the base 64 encoding and all this stuff. But actually we have fetch and IPatch that brings us into a position where we don't have to do that. So why don't we just use that? So the simplify branch looks really simple now. So essentially it has data node access operations fetch, which take a list of identifiers and return a list of instances. IPatch, which takes a list of instances and tells you that the patch was successful. And we have RPCs that do a post of a list of instances and return a list of instances, and event streams where you observe a list of instances. So this is all great, except for the little problem that there is still one query parameter in the events stream thing we have to think about. But this is just SIDs, not a whole instance identifier. So maybe that's not a big problem. What's not so clear is, do we need these two items? The first one is a full data store access, where you don't take a particular data node out of the data store, but just get the whole thing or replace the whole thing. So writing a new configuration for a device that could be done in a full data store access. And here, of course, we don't have lists of instances, but we really have a whole Yang tree, data tree for the data store. And this looks different from all the other things that we have. We also have the special case for error responses, which are also defined in the Yang module, where we also don't have an instance identifier because the error response is not an instance. It's data in flight, not data at rest. So this also would use the Yang data plus Seaborn type. So that's a question I would like to present. Do we need these two things? If yes, okay, we know how to do it. It's in the draft. But if we can further simplify, I, of course, would be happy. So what are the use cases for full data store access in particular?
Robert, I can't answer your question as to whether you need it or not. I was just going to say that in some of the sort of service provider deployments of Yang, when they use those protocols, they quite like to do like a config replace every config change. And the reason they do that is because then they guarantee the device has the right complete configuration. Appreciate in the space that this is deployed in, you may not want to do that. But even if the configuration is small, some people may say, well, actually, it's easier just to always send the exact configuration and the full configuration, because then I guarantee it's never going to be wrong. It's never like going to be patched or diffed incorrectly. So, but it's not really an answer.
Okay, thank you. Good. So we don't have to do another round of simplification. I was just interested in looking whether we can. This data type, Yang data plus zero, is already defined in the Yang zero document. The other two data types, instances and identifiers, these are new data types coming from COMI. So next steps, we should discuss these changes, make any changes we still want to do in -13, get some more implementer feedback. We were a little bit late for the hackathon this weekend. Probably do another working group plus call, because this is a rather radical change that we have made. But maybe it's also a good idea to do another working group plus call 2 years after the last one, and ship it. I think that's it. Yeah.
Thank you, Karsten and Rob. Okay, the next would be Martina with DNS over co-op. And yeah, in the interest of time, we're on the safe side. All the next presenters consider about 8 minutes or so. But I hope that should work for everyone.
Okay. Yeah, I think my slide deck needs to be shared.
Correct. You were apparently in control of Karsten's slide now.
So yeah, okay. Sorry. Okay.
Release and take it again.
Yeah. And okay. There it is.
Good.
Okay.
Please go ahead.
Yep. As you can see, it's not that long a slide deck. Yeah, I want to talk again about DNS over co-op. First, some minor introduction. Why do we need this? We might have, even in the IoT, some eavesdroppers for DNS requests, and our countermeasure is to encrypt the name resolution triggered by the IoT device. And for that, we wanted to use co-op, so we can use the encrypted communication based on DTLS and OSCO, and also can use blockwise message transfer to circumvent the pass interview problem we have with DNS over DTLS, and we can also share those system resources we already have in our co-op application. And yeah, basically this is just a short update because we didn't do all that much since IETF 115. First of all, we addressed some review from the DNS Directorate, namely Tim Wyszynski. And we specified the doc server role in terms of DNS terminology. We added a subsection on how to implement DNS push in DOC. And we added an appendix on reference implementations. Actually, by now, this is its own section according to the corresponding RFC. Thanks, Matthias, for that. And yeah, and also we clarified that the communication between doc and other DNS component is actually agnostic of the transport, because there were questions raised if DNS over DTLS is required for that or something like that. Yeah, next, we also started to address some feedback that Ben Schwartz from DNS Op was giving, which will sadly only be in the next version, so -03. The first question was why DOH isn't sufficient when we use a proxy core, a core proxy. And yeah, the clear things here are that we have a performance advantage when using fetch, and we also use some DTL rewriting to get better caching advantages. And so the real question shouldn't be that, but how to translate DOC to DOH at the core up to HTTP proxies, or a more core generalized question, how to translate fetch. Then Ben also asked us to explain why the TTL rewriting is proposed, and there will be an evaluation incoming hopefully next end of the week. So we will cite this and hopefully this will clear things up. And the other thing is that we also need this cache optimization, because in co-op proxies and thus caches have a little bit more importance than in HTTP in our eyes. Then the question was that if doc lives on an URI path, and if so, we should consider using a default path. We don't have default paths in co-op, so this isn't really an option. But we will give out a recommendation to use the root path, since we then don't need a URI path option. It's maybe inconvenient to not have a default path, but at least as Christian told me, it can also be the other way around, very inconvenient if you enforce default paths. And lastly, he recommended to add a section on how to bootstrap doc in a SVCB record, and that opened another whole list of discussion points. First of all, we have a co-op ID that exists in the ALPN registry, but it is never mandated for DTLS. So Christian started already a discussion on that on the mailing list, if this also can be used for DTLS. And for OSCORE and ad hoc, we actually need some still some mechanism to do this via SVCB DNS. So there's also a discussion started on the mailing list. So for our next step, we want to, of course, address these feedbacks and finally pick some ID for the DNS message format. Are there any questions?
None from the room, apparently. None in the chat.
Okay.
Christian, actually.
Christian, just a brief note. One of the, I think, most dangerous parts of the SVCP things has already received positive feedback from the authors there. So I think this should all be going pretty well.
Okay, great. Any further questions? Okay, then thank you, and yeah, have a nice rest of the day.
Thanks, Martina. Okay, so next is Giuseppe, I think, with performance measurement for co-op.
Hello, can you hear me?
We hear you very quiet and far away.
And now?
A bit better.
Better? Or
Keep going that way. Keep going.
let me raise the volume. Is this better now?
Yeah, it's acceptable, I think.
Okay.
So will you share the slides yourself?
Yes, I can. Ask to share. Okay.
Okay, we are seeing them now.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, this is an update about the co-op performance measurement option. We also presented this draft during one of the last interim meeting. What is the motivation? Just to be quick, we are looking for a new mechanism to measure co-op performance that can be useful to meet the operational requirements. Of course, this new performance measurement tool need to be straightforward methodology for the constrained environment, and also it must be a simple mechanism requiring just a minimal collaboration from the endpoints. There is a work ongoing in IPPM, so-called explicit flow measurement, that it is in last call, that aims to employ a few marking bits inside the header of each packet for loss and delay measurement. In particular, we focus on two simple mechanisms, spin bit and square bit. These are already included in standard track document. For example, the spin bit idea is to create a square wave signal using a bit whose length is equal to the round trip time. It is optional in Quick. While the square bit creates a square waves of a no length as defined in the RFC 9341. This is also a standard track document, and this can be used for packet loss measurements. So the proposal of the co-op performance measurement option is to employ these two bits, for example, spin bit and square bits, in a new option. So the square bit can be used for packet loss measurement in both directions, and spin bit can be used for round trip time measurement. There is also a proposal to combine, to reinforce the queue information with delay information by using only one bit. So for now, we propose just two patterns for this option, but of course, this is only the base proposal, but more extension can be discussed in the future. Now, we addressed in the last version several comments we received, especially during the last interim, and we improved the documents to details the application scenarios and use cases. In particular, this performance measurement option allow end-to-end measurements, but it can also be used for split measurement. So intermediaries such as probes or proxy can also participate to the performance measurement application. Different scenarios are considered within the draft. So in case we have non-proxying endpoints, in case we have collaborating proxies, in case we have non-collaborating proxies, or caching or non-caching, and of course DTLS and score. The simple scenarios with the non-proxying endpoints, we have the co-op performance option that can be applied end-to-end between client-server. Since it is elective, it can be ignored by endpoint that does not understand it. So the measurement that can be enabled in this simple case is end-to-end, on-path, upstream and downstream on the probe, and also intra-domain if you have more than one probe, of course. The scenario is a little bit more complicated if we have proxies. In this case, of course, since each proxy create a session, of course, the co-op performance measurement option can be applied between client server or between, let's say, client proxy on the separate session. So between client proxy, proxy, and proxy server. So the measurement in this case can be done between the different sessions. And also, if you consider the probe, the measurement can also be done on each probe, of course, so on path upstream and downstream for each probe and each proxy. And you can also calculate intra-domain portion between different probes. So this is let's say, the most complete case. The case of non-collaborating proxies, it's a little bit different because we discussed during the last interim meeting that if we have caching proxy, the measurement would not be possible. So according to this consideration, we define the performance measurement option as proxy unsafe. That means that it's unsafe for forwarding by proxy that does not understand it, because if we have non-collaborating proxy, the measurement will not be possible because the bit, the information would be mixed after the proxy, and the things will not work in that case. So the simple approach is to say, okay, the performance measurement option is proxy unsafe in any case, and in case of non-collaborating proxy and caching proxy, the measurement is not possible. But we also consider that an implementation may consider the performance measurement option as safe to forward if the proxy are non-caching, because if the proxies are non-caching, the measurement will work if one client is the only node that is done measurement. The case, but this is, let's say, a corner case we may omit in the future version of the draft. We just mentioned that an implementation may consider this case. The case of DTLS and OSCORE is also included, of course. So we state in the draft that when a client uses a collaborating proxy, the separated session can be secured using the DTLS, but an on-path observer cannot perform the measurement in that case. The case of OSCORE, of course, there are two possibilities with outer and inner option. The inner option can be used for measuring the connection to the end-to-end peer, but the outer can be used for measuring the connection to the next proxy. So in this slide, I just recap the changes in the latest two versions. So as I said, it was presented and discussed during the last interim meeting. And the comment received from Christian, Marco, and Carsten have been addressed. In particular, we defined the option as proxy unsafe instead of safe to forward. We revised all the application scenarios to include the case of caching and non-caching proxies, and also revised the OSCORE and the DTLS case. So, and a lot of editorial changes. Thank you to Marco for review. So yeah, the draft is based on well-known methodologies and applied in standard track document. It aims to meet the limited resources of constrained environment. So we welcome, of course, questions, comments, and we ask the working group to evaluate the adoption. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Giuseppe. Any comment or question? So there has been activity, pretty much also interactive on this document throughout a number of interim meetings. Just wanted to check how many have read a recent version of the document. Just raise your hand in the room or join the queue if online. 2 on site and Christian online, and I think there should be actually a few more, but okay. I think we can use the show of hands tool to do a quick check. So I'm going to ask how many people think that this document is ready for working group adoption. Choose raise hand if you agree. Choose do not raise hand if you disagree. Let's leave 15 seconds or so. Maybe not needed. Okay, I'm gonna stop this in 3, 2, 1. So 11 raise their hands for the minute takers. Christian, you have a comment?
Yes, Christian Amsus. So first, thanks to the authors for doing the updates. I think the option is now sound in the sense that it will not conflict with other things in the core ecosystem. That being said, I think this document is also ready for a working group adoption. I would personally just prefer if this were handled in IPPM, because there seems to be a general perception, whether that's a good thing or not is a different matter, that documents coming out of core are endorsed or recommended things to do with co-op, and we've seen in the other direction trouble with people picking up things that were individual documents, the registered good options, no response, for example. I don't, so like, this is not breaking anything, but it's also not something that I would recommend someone to pick up who is just using co-op and looking through what other things they could do. So I think it would be better suited in IPPM, but I don't see I won't object doing it here, but I'm not particularly supporting it either.
Yeah, thank you, Christian. Thank you, Christian, for your feedback. In this case, I can share my experience with because I already have a couple of RFC in IPPM, and I sometimes when you so the normal approach is to go on the specific working group to standardize the application of an IPPM method for a particular protocol. For example, I recently published an RFC about the application of the alternate marking method to IPv6, and the draft was fully managed in 6 months. But I agree with you, so IPPM need to be aware of this work. So maybe we can if the draft will be in some way adopted, or the adoption call will start, I will suggest you put in copy also IPPM, of course. And
yeah, so with respect to which working group does this, we had an interchange with IPPM, so we tried to push it over the fence, and it was pushed back. Yeah, it's IPPM's point of view that it's the applications that define the actual documents for this, and I think fundamentally this is a sound thing to do. It's certainly not something that you do by default just because it's defined. But in the end, the RFC is not going to tell you whether it came from IPPM or core anyway. So I don't think we are creating a big a problem here. There are some assumptions in the IPPM methods that don't work too well with the rather occasional traffic we have in some co-op environments. So during working group, during the time this document is a working group document, we may want to make sure that we have some cautions in the document about the applicability to different traffic patterns. But we can do that here, and we know more about our traffic patterns than the IPPM people. So that's maybe another reason to complete this document here.
Yeah, I fully agree with you, Karsten, because there are, for example, in the draft, all the application scenarios are specified, and this is, let's say, something that can be done in core and not in IPPM, because in IPPM there is no knowledge about these kind of scenarios.
Thank you again, Giuseppe. And yeah, the chairs will issue a working group adoption call.
Okay, thank you.
So next item is COP over GATT. That's Christian. It's great if you stay also around 8.5 minutes. So you can.
Yep, I think I can stay within that time. So hello everyone. I'd like to share an update of Co-op over GATT, which I've spent quite a lot of time implementing and testing through the last half year or so. So just to recap what this is a transport of co-op that is not defined in terms of any IP-based protocol, but that is done through the Bluetooth Low Energy profile of GATT, which has the nice property that it is widely available, even from web browsers. So at least for Chrome-based browsers, you can use this from a web application. Now, why would we do this? Especially in the IETF, for the very same reason we did co-op over WebSockets. Some applications are executed in environments in which they do not have access to the peers they want to communicate with. For example, because they are sandboxed in a web browser, but they have some privileges by which they can access the devices, but there are just not these just don't happen to use the protocols that we usually use. So for these cases, we can use alternative transports, which work quite well in co-op. The previous draft -02 turned out to have some problems that some of which I've already addressed in -03. In particular, that BLE just didn't work precisely as I expected, but also that it didn't have role reversal, which was a known issue, and that it might need some additional discovery mechanisms based on the implementation experience gathered. The new mechanism, the previous mechanism did not use tokens at all because it relied on Bluetooth Low Energy GATT to keep apart different requests, which only worked as long as we are sticking with one direction, and did not easily allow the having different requests open at the same time. So the new -03 version introduces a very short header with tokens that work just as we know it from all the other transports, but a very much stripped down version of message IDs because because GATT gives us complete ordering on the messages, at least in one for each direction. So we get away with just using a single bit of message ID. And in the end, it behaves similar to co-op over UDP, with all the options of doing reliable or unreliable transfer, but adjusted to the properties of the underlying mechanism. The discovery topic is something that unlike the previous ones which were anticipated, I did not anticipate. The main issue is that when you're in a situation where you have just the most basic set of Bluetooth Low Energy operations, you may see a lot of devices, but if you already know which device you want to connect to, for example, by its URI or by some other properties, like its authorization server, its audience identifier, or even properties of resources that you would usually discover with multicast, this cannot be easily done, but it would require pairing with each and every of those devices, which is on its own a very quick process. But in the APIs that are available, might be an extra step. So for example, if you're in a web browser and want to connect to a device with a known authorization server, then you would have to click through all the available peers and try them out individually. Whereas if discovery mechanisms that we already have were extended into this document, into this protocol, we could streamline the process and offer already the right device to the end user. This is unlike the previous item, this is something I have rough ideas on, but that is not essential for minimal working protocol, and that I would like to extend over time. There are a few other extension possibilities. For example, can we do multicast at least in the other direction, because devices can send out beacon messages really, I'm sorry, they call it advertisements, but in radio terminology, they are beacons. They can do that really, really cheaply. So maybe we can use that, but I think this should not be part of the original plan. But it's something good to have inside to make sure that all the extension points that are needed for this later on are available. One open issue that has been around for quite some time is the topic of addressing. -03 doesn't do any updates there, but in essence, this is on protocol negotiation, which is also a document of mine, but I didn't manage to do anything big there. Those are expected to evolve in essentially in lockstep, or taking input from each other as things get along. So yeah, where do I want to go with this? -03 doesn't have implementations yet, but I expect them to be available in a few weeks from now. I'd like to keep this in sync with transport indication, but in essence, for going forward with this, I would like to explore the question of, is this something that this working group would want to take on as an item? Thank you.
Thank you, Christian. Any question or comment, anyone?
Just a minor comment, but I have tested the implementation from the browser on a board, and it was kind of working fine. You come from the Unix domain or Linux domain. On the Mac, there were some issues. We can maybe work on them together, but I would like to test it a bit. Sorry.
Happily so. Yes, please.
Yeah. So, yeah, good work.
I think Göran has a comment.
Göran Selander. Yeah, I think this is great work, and I'd like to see that being continued, and if possible, being adopted in the working group. This is something that I think can be very useful for the settings when we only have basically the BLE setting. So I'm in favor of adopting this.
And +1 in the chat from Ivo. And +1 for adoption. Not this version. Can you elaborate, Carsten?
Yeah, I think it would be a good idea to get a little bit more implementation experience, so we understand what we are getting ourselves into. But I'm pretty confident that this will go right. But I also would like to be able to answer a few questions that maybe we can't answer at this point in time.
If you have concrete questions, please send them along, that I can make sure to include them in the implementation testing and gathering.
+1 for adoption from Francesca, also as an individual. Yeah, I can say, Christian, I've read the last version of the document. I think you have wrapped up a lot of open points, so to say. May still not be written in stone, but still, it progressed the way you intended. So I think conceptually, at least, all the foundation are there. So I think we can revisit this anytime soon, not at all waiting for the next IETF meeting, but through the interim meeting sessions. All right, then. Any more comments? Thank you. Then we go to the last but not least. That should be Rafa.
Yep.
It's loading.
Yeah. Let me check here. Sure. Okay. Can you see them?
Yes. Let's go ahead.
Okay, great. Basically, the idea here is based on our previous experience in managing IKE and IPsec in the RFC 9061. So from a centralized point of view called controller, we can manage different aspects of IoT device or things. And we need some kind of interface from that centralized controller to send configuration information to the IoT device. So one aspect that can be configured and managed are security associations. And in particular, in this document, we focus on managing the ad hoc and OSCORE. So we have defined YAN data models for ad hoc and OSCORE, and defined architecture how to configure these security associations. So the steps for the whole architecture are actually two of them. The assumption is we need some kind of registration process, so the thing is registered in the controller, the centralized entity to manage the device. And then once we have that, obviously we will establish the security association there. We can send further information to the things to exchange information in a secure manner by using ad hoc or just only on score. So regarding the registration or the onboarding part, so as I said, there is an authentication process at the beginning, and then our assumption is that the thing is controlled by the central entity in a secure way. So once we have that, then we can proceed with a proposal here. And we present two cases, actually. The first case is assuming the thing has the ad hoc and score implementation. So we have defined a Jan data model to model that ad hoc information that needs to be configured from the controller. So using that data model and core count, for example, the comma interface, we send that configuration to the thing A and the thing B, so they can run ad hoc after that configuration is set up. And then from that, outscore context is generated, and then they can protect the communications. Another case is where we don't have the ad hoc implementation in the things, so just outscore. So the controller is in charge of setting the outscore context in the sync A and B, so they can establish a secure communication using outscore. And based on these two cases, we have the first Jan data model to model, let's say, ad hoc. So, generally speaking, that is divided in three parts. One for the configuring the credential into the nodes, another to define the connection information for the this node and the remote one, and some kind of policy we have added when to protect the access to a particular resource that requires outscore protection, and then the connection information is required to establish a doc and to establish the outscore context to protect the exchange. And the other Jan data model is just for outscore. So assuming SSA case 2, just outscore in the nodes, in the things. So we provide, as you can see, the outscore context, the common information, the sender and the recipient. And we have added also a policy when to protect certain resource. If that resource needs to be protected with outscore, then we refer in the policy to the outscore context that the controller has configured in the thing. And this is just an example. I won't go into the details, but essentially is the mapping of the Jan data model for the ad hoc case. So we provide all the information about the credentials and everything, the policy, what the resource, in this case, T2, T1 wants to access to T2 in the resource number 1. And this is just another example we provide is just for those scores. So we are sending actually those score context with the master key, master saldo, and everything needs to establish that outscore communication. And what we have now is a very simple proof of concept only for the case 2. We are working on the case 1 as well. So for the implementation, we have the library. IMT is working on that, and from Jan to Cyber library. So we send that information in Cyber format to the nodes. So we are using IOCOP implementation for the controller and the things. And to establish the communication between the nodes, we have the micro outscore. So we translate the Cyber information we receive in the nodes and then feed the microdog and micro outscore implementation. So to run the security between them. So that's the status right now. So our idea is to extending the data models to include, for example, different extension to a score, kudos, or the group communication and everything, or new things in ad hoc that might be required. And improving, obviously, the implementation. And we were wondering if it would be worthy to standardize this Jan data model after, obviously, an evolution of them. And I think just that. any question? Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Rafa. Any comments or question? Karsten.
So, of course, my question will be, do you need full data store access?
Sorry?
Do you need to be able to get or put full data stores to make your mechanism work?
I don't really understand the question.
Okay, but, you probably weren't there when I described one question we had in COMI, which is, do we just want to support access to individual?
If you're saying that if we need to push all the data in the nodes.
Well, COMI currently can do that, and the question is, do you need that, or is that something that we could leave out of COMI and you would still be happy?
No, it's our assumption here is at least obviously in a general way we have defined the Jan data model, but assuming the IoT basis constraint, our thoughts is we are going to use COMI to provide all the information to the nodes, not externally, just transforming the Jan data model to Cyber and sending that information to the thing. So we're assuming that, for example, in the right now in the implementation part, we are using POST to send all the information to the nodes, using the XML or the information you have seen there.
Okay, maybe we need to take this offline. Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks. We are 1 minute over time, so we adjourn the meeting. 1,000 thanks to Christian and Matthias for taking notes, and anyone who helped them. Enjoy the rest of the week. Thank you all.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Oh dear. Yes. Yeah, but it worked better than other times.
It's a bit, too many items.